Welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining us tonight. So if this is your first time attending one of our programs, we are the Musconetcong Watershed Association, or MWA. We're an independent nonprofit organization dedicated to protecting and improving the quality of the Musconetcong watershed and its waters for people and nature. We are a membership-based organization, so if you enjoy programs such as this and would like to continue to see more of them, we'll put the link to our website and the membership sign-up form in the chat. Any amount given is greatly appreciated. It allows us to continue to provide more educational programs like this, along with our planning, advocacy, and stewardship work. So now for introductions, my name is Linda Cerceau. I'm the Education and Outreach Manager at MWA. I believe we have a few other MWA staff members with us, so they can introduce themselves now. If they're on, starting with our Executive Director, you want to go ahead?
Hi, Tom D'Alessio, Executive Director of the Musconetcong Watershed Association. Welcome, everyone.
Stephen?
Hi, guys. Stephen Gransky, Communications and Development Manager for the Watershed Association. Thanks for coming.
I don't see any others right now. They might be joining us in a little bit. So without further ado, I'll go ahead and introduce our guest speaker, Dr. Michael Van Cleef. Mike is the Friends of Hopewell Valley Open Space Stewardship Director, and he also serves as their Invasive Species Strike Team Program Director. He joined the Friends of Hopewell Valley Open Space in 2007 and co-founded the Strike Team in 2008 with the goal of bringing greater efficiency and effectiveness to invasive species management. Mike has a PhD in ecology from Rutgers University and over 25 years of experience in land stewardship, planning, and research, working extensively in the evaluation and management of rare and invasive species and deer management. He's consulted with over 30 organizations in New Jersey, including the New Jersey Invasive Species Council, for which he prepared the New Jersey Strategic Management Plan for Invasive Species. So, Mike, if you want to go ahead, thank you for being here.
All right, thank you. Okay, does that all look good?
Looks good.
Okay, good. Okay, so I'll go through the talk, and please, if you have any questions that anywhere along the way, feel free to ask them along the way. That's usually the way I prefer it. Feels a little bit more nice and flowy from my point of view if people do that. So please feel free if you have some project you're doing and want advice or anything like that. Definitely just ask anytime along the way. Okay, so the Strike Team's mission: protect natural lands, coordinated strategic invasive species management. So we say team, we mean it. There's a small crew of us that are mostly part-time, or we're all part-time on the Strike Team project, and we have partners all over the place that we depend on to learn from, hear about new observations of this or that, and that's basically how we work. We gather information from lots of different sources and try to reflect it back out to the conservation community and the general public. We do lots of things, mapping and data analysis. We do lots of outreach, training, and we do nuts and bolts things like search for and eradicate invasive species, with a particular focus on something that's called early detection and rapid response. And that's basically for newly emerging invasive species. We're very keen on slowing the spread of invasive species by going after the most newly emerging species before they become widespread, and setting them back by eliminating every population we can get to. Whoops, I'm going the wrong way. So we have staff, like I said, we're all part-time, primarily based on grants and contracts. We have a statewide steering committee that helps guide us, and we have a technical advisory committee. So when you see our list of species on our website, There's no single person behind that. There's a whole group of experts and various taxa, um, from pests and pathogens to plants, um, wildlife, whatever the case may be. So we have experts that help us determine our list. And since 2008, we've searched almost 800,000 acres, us and partners, detected 22,000 populations, and eradicated just shy of 7,000 of them. So I'm assuming you can see my cursor, the difference between these two numbers, right? So we can detect way more than we can get rid of. So that really prompts us to be as efficient as possible and very targeted in our actions to the extent possible. Currently, we're wrapping up a U.S. Forest Service grant with 30 private landowners in areas that were designated through past grants that we did through GIS analysis of being the highest quality forest areas in all of the different regions of New Jersey. And we have partners in Mercer County Parks, Morris County Parks, New Jersey Audubon, Saraland Conservancy. We have regular grants, or contracts, I should say, with a number of folks. These are some of our more long-standing contracts. And then we do training and outreach efforts. I haven't updated for last year yet. But typically we do around 20, couple dozen events a year and try to reach around 1,000 people a year through our outreach efforts, including things like we're doing right now. This is something I want to emphasize to folks if they were considering volunteering. We call them volunteer stewardship teams. These are groups of volunteers that essentially have adopted a park for stewardship purposes. And this is just a few of them. Obviously, we know of about a couple of dozen. There might even be more that we don't know of. But we have a map on our website so you can look, hey, I live here. Is there a team nearby? So we get a lot of times someone will say, I want to volunteer. What could I do? My first response is, where in the state do you live? Check out this map. Is there a group that's doing really good work that you can, hook up with? And if not, you might want to start your own volunteer stewardship team. And, we'll try to provide advice, technical advice, things like that, about how to start one. So if you ever were interested in something like this, there are amazing examples around the state of groups, and all of the people that we have contact information for all these different groups that we know about. And you can feel free to reach out to these folks and see, what they're doing and how they've had success. So this is sort of the nutshell. You have a core of 1 to 3 leaders, a pool of 10 to 15 or so volunteers. You have predictable work days that everyone knows when they're going to be. And one or more of the group leaders is going to be there every time to make sure, things happen in a structured, organized way. Follow a concise long-term plan where you could check off a box, right? So you don't go to a place and say there's 25 acres of barberry infestation and say, our goal is to get rid of all the barberry. Like, that'll never fly. So you have smaller goals that you can check off. So it might be go after an emerging invasive species that only has 10 plants on the whole place you're interested in. That's something you could start and finish. And what we've found is invasive species control is cool. I love it. I am totally into it. But most regular sane people, they also like to do positive things, not just get rid of a negative, but add a positive. So it really helps these stewardship teams do best when they not only do invasive control, but they do restoration as well. So we have lots of good things in New Jersey left. I think most people sort of that are like us know these things. There's plenty left to protect. 2,000 native plants, all kinds of interesting things in New Jersey, from a stronghold for the endangered bog turtle. Sussex County has the most dragonfly and damselfly species of any county in the country. We still have wild things like bobcats and timber rattlesnakes and black bears. Northern meadowlark butterfly is a stronghold for a globally rare butterfly species. So we have a lot worth protecting. And overall, we want to see healthy forests. So, You know, I'm not sure the last time you may have walked into a forest and seen it look like this background picture, where you have herbs, tree and shrub seedlings, subcanopy, canopy, and that's because of deer overpopulation. So we have a deer overpopulation, which creates the stage where invasive species can flourish. So, you know, we still have a lot going on. Like I said, we have about half the state is in natural cover right now. Lots of that natural cover is still unprotected. It could be developed in the future, but as of right now, just a little bit over half of our state is in natural cover. And, you know, we've done lots of things wrong, right? We all know that. Like I said, so about half of the state, we've destroyed the habitat. We've fostered overabundant deer. Again, our fault, not the deer's. We've introduced many invasive species, our fault. Abandoned farmland, turns out that it's so highly altered that it's just a hotbed of invasive species activity. So that really has a big effect. We've changed fire regimes. Native Americans burned for thousands and thousands of years in strategic ways, and we just stopped doing that. So things are going to change. Stream flows, fragmentation, not to mention climate change. So we've done a lot of different things that we're trying to mitigate to the extent that we can. And like I said, the deer issue is absolutely critical, essential to all this. The deer overpopulation really explains a lot of the problems that we're having right now. And it supersedes climate change. It really does. So when Europeans came to North America initially, the estimate is that we had about 10 deer per square mile. Because of unregulated commodity hunting, people could sell deer, sell venison. Around 1900, we had 0 deer in the state, which clearly is not correct. It took about 72 years to get us back to where it was pre-European, right around 10 deer per square mile. And then it skyrocketed through the 70s and 80s, 90s. You know, we reached levels and have maintained levels of up to 100 deer per square mile. Sometimes maybe you get 50 deer per square mile when you don't have a lot of farmland or development. But either way, you have 5, 10 plus times the amount of deer that any of our native systems were used to. And if you look at the history of invasive species, you definitely find tracking with the deer population. So in the 50s or prior to the 50s, honeysuckle was pretty much the only thing that anyone who did a flora of anywhere in New Jersey would say is an invasive non-native species. So so much has changed, right? So as the deer population blossomed through the 70s, we set the stage for the 80s for, you know, things that we consider they're everywhere, right? And they've always been everywhere. But that, from nature's point of view, it's been a blink of an eye that this has changed so dramatically. So in the 80s is when stiltgrass and barberry really took hold. You know, again, blink of an eye from nature's point of view. And, you know, we continue to add more and more species over time. But the real blossoming, so to speak, of invasive species followed about a decade of massive growth of the deer population. Once they had removed a ton of the native understory, it left plenty of resources wide open for invasive species to take hold. So what we found is, you know, when you look at nature, it looks really complicated, and it really is. But when you're doing stewardship, you want to try to prioritize your work. So what we found is that 2 factors could explain a lot of what we see and where invasive species are and aren't even today. So when you have past agricultural use, the ground was tilled, and you have high deer abundance, that is absolutely where you're going to get your largest, densest populations of invasive plants. When the reverse is true, low deer, no past agricultural land use, that's where you're going to have the least amount of invasives and the most amount of native cover. So the fundamental altering of the soil is where explains a lot of what we see currently. And I believe I have some pictures there coming up, but so yeah, keeping those things in mind. So if you're a land steward for a particular piece of property, one proxy you could use to prioritize your work without even seeing the place is look at the 1930 aerial photography. If there's forest in 1930, there's a pretty high likelihood that it had never been tilled. And you go out in the field and you could look where you have older forest and areas that you know are forest growing on post-agricultural lands, and you're going to see the invasives very much clustered where the agricultural activity had occurred in the past. And if anyone wants numbers or really into all this, Jay Kelly has done an absolutely phenomenal job from Radnor Valley Community College, collecting data, comparing old flora to current conditions. And he's really collected lots of evidence that more or less supports this concept here.
And Mike, could
yep.
you do a quick favor and hit the hide button on your screen share thing at the bottom there?
Yep.
Thank you.
Okay, yeah, it was covering the bottom. Okay. Okay, so again, so if you're doing stewardship, how do you think about doing it? What's the most impactful thing you can do? And that the base of all stewardship is going to be trying to reduce the deer population. Because that's going to give native species the ability to then grow and compete effectively against invasives. A lot of people will say, oh, invasives, well, they're just really more competitive, so that's why they win, and what could you do? The reality is that that's not the case. You know, if you look at places, the small number of places that have good deer management and have a large enough place to affect change, or long-standing deer exposures, you see that native species compete very well against invasive species when you remove the deer factor. So the analogy that I've always used is I could beat the fastest man in the world in a foot race as long as you tie his legs together. That's what's happening, right? So the native plants are extremely competitive, but they're being hindered in their competitive ability. It's not that they're not competitive, it's just that they're hindered because essentially they're more yummy to the deer. So it's not a matter of straight up competition. So fundamentally, that's what needs to happen. And quite honestly, we should all do what we can on our own preserves, our own pieces of land, private lands, any land where we can get deer management to happen. We should all be doing it as much as we can. But there's bigger issues at larger scales that we really need to address in New Jersey if we're going to address the problem more broadly. So just throwing that out there, everyone should do what they can on their own property. But you're not going to create miracles on a 50-acre piece of property. You can get some improvement, but we really need bigger policy, bigger strategies at bigger scales to overcome the deer overabundance problem. Then you move up the chain to invasives. So if you're going to start working on invasives, you go after the emerging species first. And the strike team, through our technical committee, we give them stage numbers. So stage 0 would be something that we only know of less than 10 populations in the state. Stage 1 would be, you know, like 11 to 100 populations known, and then up the chain. So you know that if you have a stage 0 species on your property, that should absolutely be the highest priority over any other invasive control that you might consider. So you really want to try to help nip these populations in the bud before they spread to your neighbor's property and then their property, et cetera, et cetera. So you want to really tamp things down while we still can and get those truly emerging invasive species first. And then the most resource intensive part of the stewardship hierarchy is restoration, which typically for most groups is going to require some kind of grant funding. You know, these things tend to be more expensive, but smaller scale things can be done restoration wise. But yeah, to me, this is the absolute hierarchy. This is how we should be thinking about how can we create the most positive impact that we possibly can. Deer, invasives, starting with emergent invasives, and then go areas with higher value, and then restoration. So basic stuff: invasive plant introduced to an area outside their range, grow densely and exclude other species, and then they have these impacts. So when you look at of the group of non-native species, which ones become invasive, they have particular characteristics. When you have 5, 10 plus times the amount of deer than there were historically in New Jersey, the biggest reason why a particular non-native plant may become invasive is deer don't eat them. So it gives them a huge advantage. There are plenty of non-native species that deer eat. And anyone who's gardened with non-native plants, which is just about everyone at some point, right? If not now, they know that they eat non-native plants. But non-native plants that deer don't eat have a huge leg up in heading towards becoming an invasive weed. And then they have, you know, all these things that people of biologists, botanists have defined as weeds. They're tolerant of a wide variety of soil types, wide variety of light levels. They mature quickly and produce lots of seeds. So this is the basic definition of any weed, no matter where it's from. And deer don't eat them is a huge factor. So Siebold's viburnum, deer don't eat. Garlic mustard, deer don't eat. Barberry, deer don't eat. And just to give you a sense of the scale of the numbers, you know, there's been about 10,000 introductions. Our flora of New Jersey has about 1,000 non-native plants in it. So we've gone from 10,000 to 1,000. And then going down even further, there are about 50 widespread invasive plants and about 100 emerging invasive plants. That's why I keep focusing on this emerging. We don't want to add this 99 to this 50 and end up with 149 widespread invasive plants. If we can keep some of this, or as much as we possibly can of this, from not transitioning to this, that's going to help keep things from getting even worse. So out of 10,000, about 150 species are the issue. So climate change, we got to be thinking about this too, because it is starting, it absolutely is showing up. It's real, as we all might have guessed, and there is evidence. You know, so, you know, I mean, I guess I'm more closer to about 35 years doing this kind of thing. I have to update my bio for my age. There are species that were not invasive 35 years ago that are now invasive. So within my career time so far, I have seen the change. That's very likely for certain species of being related to climate change, because these species were invasive in warmer climates, and now they're becoming invasive here in New Jersey because of the changes in the climate here. So the folks up at University of Massachusetts Amherst have dubbed them sleepers. So English ivy is a perfect example of what might be considered a sleeper. In our landscapes for 100 plus years, 150 years, being planted on purpose, never spread an inch. In the last 30 years, 20 years, it's absolutely gone bonkers. So if you go down the Cape May, even all the way up to, you know, portions of Burlington County outside of the Pine Barrens, Bordentown, just south of Trenton, entire forest understories filled with English ivy. You don't see that so much yet moving north, but when you go into forest in the north, it is absolutely not surprising to see small patches of English ivy establishing all over North Jersey. Not nearly as bad as South Jersey at this moment, but we're heading there. So a species that went from non-invasive has become exceptionally invasive, and it seems to be moving south to north. Again, lots of circumstantial evidence of climate change. Other species like winter creeper, trifoliate orange, porcelain berry, and others showing similar patterns. So we have to be very aware of what the potential invasive species are. And it might not be that they're moving from Georgia or North Carolina to New Jersey. They're bumping their way up. They're in our landscapes already. So when they're in a landscape, they can survive, but they're not like going to spread, right? Certain species. So they're here. Now they have the ability to spread, and they're already here. They're already planted. So the first wave of new invaders is not going to come in a wave from North Carolina on up. It's going to come from our own yards, spreading out into the woods. So that's something, again, to keep in mind. There are things that we may think of as non-invasive now that 10, 15 years from now will be considered invasive. So, like I said, we have different stages. This counts plants and animals. Most of the species on our list are the stage 0. We think that there's chances to sort of really take on stage 0 in one species so they don't become widespread. We think that once you've hit stage 2, there's nothing that anyone's going to do that's going to stop them from becoming widespread. So really focusing on this will prevent future damage. Tons of people ask me, why are invasive species bad? And the bottom line is they break the food web. They severely damage the food web. So one of the issues with invasive plants is not only are deer not eating those plants, insects are not eating those plants. So most plants, there's 2 kind of bug herbivores, bug things. There's specialists and there's generalists. So a generalist bug could eat lots of different plants, but there's many of them that they can't eat. A specialist bug can only eat, one plant or a small group of related plants. A lot of the invasive plants don't have those specialized bugs here. So not only the advantage of deer not eating them, they're getting an advantage of no specialist herbivore bugs eating them. So if you have, in the old days, if a farmland was abandoned, you would get a whole, this is a tiny list of what native species would be in an old field. And studies were done at Hutchinson Memorial Forest, Rutgers, for decades, looking at succession. And, these are the types of things they documented. Now, if you look at the calendar, between all the different species, there's something going on every month of the year, which is great if you need to eat every month of the year, which most living things do, especially a bird or something like that. So, you have fruit or seeds or flowers available at all times of the year. What happens often now is you get one species that is 90+% of the cover in an old field within 10 years or less. Autumn olive is very common in New Jersey to invade an old field. So in May, it makes a ton of flowers. That's great if you're a bee in May. What if you're a bee in June or July or August and the entire field has no flowers because it's all autumn olive and they did all of what they were going to do in May? So it's like going to the grocery store once a year, you're going to die. And if you look at these horrifically frightening trends of reductions in the bird population, a third of the bird population has disappeared in the last 50 years, huge reductions in insect populations. And you wonder why? Well, invasive species are part of the problem. It's not the only problem, but that is definitely a problem. If huge chunks of the landscape that would have been a food source for you are removed, that is going to reduce your survival and population growth. So similarly for fruit, September, October, olive can be a fantastic source of fruit for lots of different animals. But again, if you need to eat fruit to survive and you only have it in a month or a month and a half of the year, you're going to have a problem. As opposed to a whole assemblage of native species that would have had fruit pretty much throughout the entire year. Right, we talked about this already. And, it's more or less a stewardship common sense thing, early detection, rapid response. We know that if Chinese silvergrass is let go, it will take over and destroy a meadow. So this is a real live scenario from a park in Hopewell Township where we do a lot of work. We saw one Chinese silvergrass in this otherwise very nice, diverse, wet meadow. And how long did it take to kill one plant? 10 minutes, walking back and forth from the car to the place and spraying some herbicide on it. In that way, you prevent huge amounts of damage. So it's really about, the first step in stewardship isn't take on the biggest, ugliest problem that you probably can never solve. That's not a very smart way to work. The best way to do it is prevent future damage. Now, if the amount of time it took to do this, if it had gone into this and then we said, hey, we got a grant and we're going to restore this to a native meadow, do you think we could engineer and plant a meadow as diverse and beautiful as the one that nature put there on its own? Absolutely not. So it's just a matter of prioritization. Prevention is absolutely the way to go. And there's examples of some stage 0 species. Now, sickleweed, I'll spare you the whole story, but the gist is someone reported to me, it had never been known in New Jersey. I saw that it was a horrible weed in other parts of the country, and we killed it, and it hasn't come back. That's a win. Japanese spirea, we might have been a little too late. We'll see. We're going to keep hammering away at it. But it's possible this one will keep going to stage 1 and beyond. We don't know yet. But we'll do the best we can. So control methods, the first stop, what's the old expression is, when you find yourself in a hole, stop digging. So, that our advice is, let's all stop digging. We put together an updated list every year of plants that we think you should avoid purposely, purchasing and installing. So we have species we categorize as emerging and widespread, and organized by how they grow, tree, shrub, vine, etc. So, we ask that people voluntarily refrain. We also have a watch list. If you really want to be uber careful, we're not sure if these things are going to become invasive, but we have a watch list as well. Now, the question I've always gotten at this point in my talk is, how is it that these plants are still available to purchase? And that's because New Jersey, unlike 46 other states in the country, have absolutely zero regulation on selling invasive species. So any of these species you can buy whenever you'd like, and contribute to making the problem worse. There is legislation now. It's been close for about 1.5 years plus, almost 2 years of getting passed. We're hopeful that it'll pass this year. That will start to regulate invasive species, the sale of invasive plants, and form a new New Jersey Invasive Species Council that can evaluate all species, plants and animals, etc. So we're hopeful. If you're sort of person that likes to write your representatives and things like that, please let them know that you support legislation to curb invasive species. The only thing I'm going to mention on this chart is when I mention reducing the deer population to allow native plants to be more competitive, that's referred to as ecological control. So if native plants allowed to grow from avoiding excessive deer browse start growing, you're going to get control of invasive plants. Just that alone, removing the deer, reducing the deer, will reduce the amount of invasive species cover. And that's what we ultimately have to rely on. It isn't going to be the strike team long term or anyone else that sort of saves us from invasive species. We're just trying to slow things down in the hopes that we can get to that point where we don't have overabundant deer and native species do 99+% of the work of reducing invasive species cover through competition. So if you're going to do chemical control, so the rules are generally if you are a private landowner and you are working on the property that you own, you do not need a license. There's something counterintuitive about that, but you are allowed to do whatever the heck you want on your own private property, basically. Now, if you're like me, I'm a land steward for a nonprofit group working on a land that we might own, our organization owns, but I don't personally own it. Now I need an applicator's license. So, it's incumbent on anyone. I understand, a lot of folks have a lot of anxiety about using herbicides. We've made the decision that this is the better choice for nature to reduce the invasive species cover. We see them as a bigger problem. We could discuss, talk about that. Happy to. But if you're going to do it right. For the love of Pete, do it right. use the most benign formulation at the lowest concentration using the most targeted application method as you can if you're going to do it. And that doesn't mean put a lot of herbicide in, more than what's recommended. It doesn't mean putting half the amount in thinking now that should work. Put the amount we recommend. We've gotten on our website, it's almost completely intact from what Art Gover from Penn State sent us. And I consider him the sort of guru of invasive species control. These numbers are not made up. There are things that we know work. If you're going to do it, the strike team provides guidance on how to do it correctly. And we do use things like glyphosate and the 2-triclopyr compounds. That's our sort of go-to herbicides. Obviously, you want to be safe. There's different ways to go about it, right? So you can do foliar spraying that's not overly targeted, but you can kind of focus it in a particular area. A more targeted approach is called the cut stump method, where you actually cut down a plant and apply herbicide directly to the cut stem. So clearly that's going to be very targeted. More work intensive, but more targeted. Another method that's pretty darn targeted is called basal bark. There's some formulations that you'll spray it right on the bark all the way around, up a foot or so, depending on the type of plant, maybe higher, but it soaks through the bark and kills that one plant. And generally, you're not going to get any knockoff effects, beyond where you apply. So stuff a foot away could be perfectly fine. So it's pretty darn targeted. Other labor-intensive methods, hack and squirt, very targeted, very labor-intensive. You make little hacks and then you put the herbicide right in the spot. So there's different methods based on what you're trying to do. And a lot of people will ask, like, well, the plant's at my house, it's 25 feet away from my front door. Do I really need to use herbicide to get rid of it? And the answer is no. When you're talking about something 25 feet from your front door, you can cut that down 6 times during the growing season if you want to, without breaking much sweat. So, at a small scale, close to where you live, close to your front door, you could strategically use cutting and other mechanical methods to get rid of it. But think about it from our point of view. We need to hike into a woods 1.5 miles from the car, get rid of 1,000 plants. There's no real practical way to do that without using herbicide. So you have to make the decision that we make is we're going to use herbicides in a really careful way, targeted way, because we don't really have an effective choice. We're not homeowners walking 25 feet out our front door. So again, this is our mix percentages for different types of mixes. So if you look up, we have a sheet with every species, every invasive, and there's guidance which method works to kill that species in different situations. And then we also say exactly how many, this is percentages, what percent of the different compounds go into making the mixture. And we have another table that says, okay, if you want to make a gallon of something, you would use 4 ounces of this and 2 ounces of that. So we really have it worked out so that we could all do it in the best, safest way possible. So I already talked about this a little bit. We're waiting for this to pass. Again, like I said, that we're nearly 2 years out from when we were very close to passing it. We hope that this is the year. We think we're getting closer, but fingers crossed. We do have upcoming events. If you don't get our newsletter, I could add you to a list, and we have events advertised on that and on our newsletter. It comes out every month or every other month. I didn't change this, unfortunately. We don't know the date yet, but if you ever want to have something that's particularly fun, we have our potluck social where people will bring either invasive or native, wild forage things, and we share with each other, and it's pretty awesome and fun. So if people want to come down to Hopewell in October, it'll probably be around that same time period, mid to late October that we'll do our potluck social this year. And I'm just going to show you a few photos here, just to give you a sense of what deer management can do. So this is at Duke Farms. So I've had, you know, I've worked with them as a consultant contractor for many years, and we developed a monitoring program there. They have 2,500 acres. About 600 of the so are in a fence. The rest are outside of a fence. And they're getting remarkable progress from having such a large area that they control and such an amazingly good deer management program. So how many forests do you get to see in New Jersey that you see hickory and maple seedlings this big in the forest understory in the shade? So uncommon, and that's what we should be seeing. And there's some oaks here in the background, but just amazing. You know, and a lot of people will say, oh, it's stilt grass, nothing grows through stilt grass, hogwash. When you don't have deer at 100 deer per square mile, you get all of these tree seedlings popping up right through the stilt grass like it wasn't even there. And this was early on in the process. All of these hickory seedlings are now 5, 6, 7 feet tall, and the stilt grass is vanishing from the competition of the tree seedlings. In this picture, there's barberry in here, lost amongst all of the tree and shrubs native growing over it. So again, you know, this is what we need. We need ecological control through reduced deer herd, allowing native species to compete. That is the ultimate solution for invasive species. Similar things happened at Baldpate Mountain, where Mercer County started deer management. Probably was the first deer management in Hopewell Township at Baldpate Mountain. And here the spice bush overtopping the barberry, creating habitat for 2 rare species of birds, hooded and Kentucky warblers. So, you know, positive things can happen. But, you know, again, the deer are the linchpin. So we could open it up to questions and answers at this point.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Mike. I'm gonna start with a few questions that I saw pop up in the chat. Well, first of all, I am recording this session, so I can send out the recording to everybody. And Mike, if you're willing to send the slides, I can send those out to everyone too.
Absolutely.
Awesome. And then we got another question. Oh, I did want to mention that we do have a number of AmeriCorps Watershed ambassadors joining us, so thank you for joining us. It looks like one of them had a question. Do we know the reason why deer avoid certain invasive plants? Is it because of lack of nutrition, taste? Is there a specific reason why deer avoid some of these?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's speculation, but I think the primary reason would be, I mean, every plant, there's no plant on this planet that wants to be eaten, so to speak, right? So they're all trying to avoid being eaten one way or the other. That's how they evolved. So plants have chemical defense. You know, we think us humans are the only ones that make chemicals, toxic chemicals. Plants make toxic chemicals, mostly to avoid being eaten. So, you know, there's certain plants that have chemicals in them that either slow digestion or have some kind of, you know, essentially toxic effect, right? So they give the deer diarrhea. I mean, seriously, that it comes down to things like that. Either they have an exceptionally bitter taste, which all mammals through our evolution, including us, should realize that when something tastes bitter, stop eating it, because bitter equals poison. So, you know, deer have that, it's not lost on them. So certain species will taste bitter or be undigestible. And that's the primary reason that a deer wouldn't eat any particular plant.
Thank you. So Mike, if you wanted to, you could stop sharing your screen and we could see some of the people. If they wanted to, if you had a question, you can unmute yourself or type it in the chat, whatever you're most comfortable with. We'll leave some time for anybody who might want to unmute themselves and ask a question.
I'll chime in. So would you say that, so your perception on the invasive problems is that a lot of the invasives are sort of the symptom and the deer are the problem?
Yeah, I mean, I think, yes, you have to, in my mind, you have to prioritize, right? So two factors that lead to a lot of invasive species proliferation are one, deer overabundance, and two, the past land use. So like I said, post-agricultural lands, because the soil has been so fundamentally altered, and I have some slides I didn't share today. I have a little more detail about how they're altered, but the basic thing is they're altered in every way that anyone could imagine: physically, chemically, biologically, the microbes altered, and it just lends itself to weedy plants, native and non-native. So yeah, I mean, deer, invasive species are a symptom of the problem of deer overabundance, but of course they create their own problems in and of themselves as well. But in my opinion, and based on many decades at this point of field observations, you don't get the proliferations of invasives in places that even have relatively less deer, even within the state of New Jersey. So yeah, it's a huge part of the problem is deer overabundance. It really would make things a much more even playing field, a more competitive situation for native plants if deer were half or a third more likely of what they are now. It really is just that important.
We have a few more questions in the chat. One of them is, what are some other methods of deer management that you know of besides traditional hunting programs?
Yeah. I mean, there are efforts have been made, like birth control type things. They're exceptionally expensive and not particularly effective, at scale. And, it really does come down to, on one level, it's how much money do you want to spend? So I don't know the results of the Staten Island experiment that had been going on, but they were actually capturing males and castrating them, and returning them to the wild. Whether that's effective or not immediately or long term, I don't know what the results are, but that is outrageous expense. I mean, probably $1,000, $1,500 a surgery. That is just not practical in any real way. And hunting, I got to make the distinction. So there's recreational hunting, and then there's what we call deer management programs. So recreational hunting will get you more or less, I'll oversimplify just to make the point. Recreational hunting, if it's applied in enough places, might be able to help you maintain the herd size. Not reduce it, maintain it. If you want to reduce the herd size, you have to jump to the next level, which is deer management programs, where you essentially say to a hunter, you have a quota, and if you don't meet it, you're going to be asked to leave the program so that someone else could try. And you give benefits to a hunter in those situations, and you can make more progress on that. And what I've learned over many years is that it's really hard to find what we call a management hunter, because what happens is not only do you need the skill and the willingness to try to take a lot of does, because that's what's driving the population, the does, you need a lot of money, And what I found is when we had management hunters in the very beginning of our program, and I was just thrilled, they were doing such an amazing job. The numbers were going down. We were seeing some improvements in the forest. And then I realized how much money and time that they were volunteering for the cause of a problem that we have all created. So we keep thinking, oh, well, that, those guys, they like hunting. So it doesn't matter if they spend, $5,000 on gear and permits and gas and everything else. Like, they love it. Like when you're a recreational hunter and you take 1 or 2 deer, that could be that enjoyment. When you say to someone, I want you to take 20 deer, that goes beyond enjoyment to a job. And we can't expect hunters to pull our dead weight, pardon to all of us. But you know, that's what we're asking, and it's not fair. And to be honest with you, you're just not going to find a lot of hunters willing to do that. Um, you know, so what we've found is when it's possible, if you really want bigger change, you're going to have to pay hunters to take deer, whether that's within the context of a deer management program or a corporate hunting program or whatever the case may be, where you're allowed legally to pay a hunter to take deer. That's when you get your biggest changes. And it doesn't take 100 guys. You know, I know of Pennington Borough, Mercer County, where one hunter, maybe he has one person helping him, is taking 150 deer a year off of several properties in one small borough in New Jersey. So it's really a matter of having the right person and realizing that it's not fun to take 100 deer. That's a lot of work. So you've got to pay someone if you want them to do work.
We've got some more questions in the chat. I'm going to pause and go. I see someone has their hand raised. Regina, if you wanted to hit unmute and if you had a question. Should be at the top of the screen if you're looking for the unmute button.
Sorry for the delay.
No problem.
Thanks for your presentation. Sorry to be coming in as a little bit of a killjoy here, where we seem to need funds to do the things we want to do. I just happened to be have my phone nearby and was scrolling as to what this new administration is looking to kill funding for invasive plants is actually on one of the headlines. Rescind natural resource funds and repeal science funding. Do you get most of your funding from federal, and how might this affect you?
Yeah, we paid attention this morning when we saw the news. You know, they're every group has got to assess what they're getting from federal sources. The strike team, we've gotten regularly funding from the U.S. Forest Service, sort of through the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation, which is federal funds. We get, cost share agreements with, U.S. Department of Agriculture, NRCS. So it obviously would have an impact on us. The strike team personally, sure, some of the biggest grants we've ever gotten have all been federal. So depending on how things go, this current spat, future budgets, we might not be able to rely on federal funding for some time. So, we'll do what we can otherwise. We'll have to rely on obviously more state and local. Well, the state unfortunately has never really spent any money either, so that's no change there. But county and primarily counties have contracted with us for many years, and we could hope that increases. But my guess would be that the strike team will get less done. I don't think there's a reason to shy away from that concept. If federal funding gets cut, the strike team will get less work done. That many more invasive species running around freely.
Thank you.
Thank you for your question. Another question from the chat. Are there any states or municipalities that have done an exemplary job of addressing invasive plants? And if so, what is their formula?
Yeah. They're not New Jersey. There's a lot of strange politics that I'm learning about, and just the dynamics. Again, I'm not big on knowing about legislation, but yeah, when a lot of times, in the Northeast, New Jersey, maybe in particular, we look at you know, those other states, you know, as, you know, Mississippi, psh, Missouri, give me a break. They are ahead of us. Missouri in particular, you know, they blow our doors off on what they do about invasive species. They have funding at some, no one gives enough, let's be serious, but no, but you know, they have a structure and a logic to them and an incentive programs and all kinds of things going on. They have a cool truck with logos and stuff on it that I really want. But you know, there's tons of places that are, you know, rural, conservative, whatever you want to call them, that are leaps and bounds ahead of New Jersey. Um, you know, so what's the formula? I don't know exactly. You know, I can hypothesize that, you know, it's just collectively just the way our population is and where we live, we don't have as much interaction as some states with much lower populations that have outdoors in their DNA of more of a larger percent of the population. And that's just my best guess. I don't know. You know, but Pennsylvania blows our doors off. New York blows our doors off. Connecticut blows our doors off. Massachusetts blows our doors off. Missouri blows our doors off. You know, California, there's no political rhyme or reason of who's the leader of these places. There's plenty of Republican, plenty Democrat states that blow our doors off. So you have to wonder why, you know, and it's just a strange structure of New Jersey where the environment gets, you know, contamination or things like that get higher concern here than nature for nature's purpose, you know. And that's just a pattern that I've seen. There's more environmental, there's a lot of environmentalists in New Jersey. There's not nearly as many conservationists in New Jersey. And I think that translates through our leadership to a lack of action over decades and decades. And we hope that that will change with this legislation we hope will pass. And maybe we'll start catching up with Kentucky one day.
Someone is asking, do you have a recommended source or app for somebody who wants to get better at identifying plants?
Yeah, you know, I'll mention that we have an app, EDDMaps, EDDMAPS, and it's a map that's regional, and there's a drop down for New Jersey, and we hope that people will report their findings through that app. But I cannot say for a second that iNaturalist doesn't blow that app's doors off. So if you want to try to figure out what something is, I know there's a lot of apps out there, and I am not, you know, a connoisseur of apps. All I know is that it seems to me that iNaturalist is an amazingly good app. I use it for I mean, it works for mushrooms and plants and bugs and everything else. So it's great that way. It has aids that help get you, if you don't know what a particular species is, it'll either tell you exactly what it is or give you a really darn good guess. And it's backed up by humans. So it uses AI, of course, and you take the picture, it guesses what it is based on what other observations are around you. So it's great that way. And then a human, another user, will look at it and say, I agree with that. Or no, that's something else. So that combination of characteristics makes, to me, iNaturalist rise right to the very top of these apps that are out there. And we're starting to get wise to using iNaturalist because, quite frankly, people are blowing right past our app and going to iNaturalist. So we're learning, download iNaturalist. I was mortified because I was like, I smell, this doesn't feel right. There's, you know, it seems like everyone's using iNat, you know. And we went there and we've done comprehensive reviews of all the data sources other than iNat for kudzu in New Jersey because we want to eradicate it from the state. We may have just doubled the number of populations that we know about because of the download we made from the iNat database. So it does seem like a lot of people are using it. You know, you could use the EDDMaps app too. They're both free apps. But if you don't know at all what you might be looking at, which can be often depending, you know, like if it's anything other than a plant, that's where I'm the category I'm in, you know, so I use it to get in the ballpark for anything other than a plant. But it gets you in the ballpark pretty quickly. And then you could look at our app and, you know, see, is that something that we've listed or not? But yeah, so that would be my recommendations.
Great. Do you know of a program that removes invasive vines and some native vines from desirable trees to prevent them from being strangled and brought down?
Yeah, the volunteer stewardship teams are the only the programs that I know of, you know, and there isn't a site where if it's not the first thing you do, it's the second thing you do is devine trees, because you don't want those invasive vines pulling down trees, which sets the stage for even more invasive species growth when the trees get pulled down. Yeah, so there's no, you know, it really does come down a lot of times to volunteers adopting a particular place and doing good stewardship there. You know, that often is what will save the day, because even, you know, state or county, municipal, nonprofit, no one has enough stewardship resources to do everything that we need to do to reverse the damage we've done. So everyone does what they can, but there's huge gaps, and that's why we need those volunteer stewardship teams for people to step up. Even if a team's only function were to devine trees, they would be doing, yes, tree rescuer, absolutely. You know, that would be a huge service, and it doesn't have to get more complicated than that. You see a vines growing up a tree, get rid of it so the tree doesn't get pulled down.
Say you remove an invasive, how do you dispose of it so it doesn't become someone else's problem?
So obviously plants make seeds. You can cut a plant down and maybe seeds fall off of it, or you might be worried that if you lay it on the ground, it'll reroot. Don't worry. The odds of that happening are all very low compared to letting the thing be alive and throwing seeds off year after year after year after year. So, you know, in my opinion, if you're going to be trying to get rid of invasive plants, the more you kill, the better. If you spend time picking it up and putting it in a bag or dragging it out to some asphalt or something like that, that's that much time that you are now not killing more invasive plants that are in the ground producing seeds and spreading all over the place. So I wouldn't stress about will they reroot if I lay them down. The odds are exceptionally low. Or if there's seeds on the plant that I cut down, I should take all those seeds and throw them in a garbage bag. Don't waste your time. You know, just keep cutting down more plants and let things rot in place. Probability wise, that's going to get you the most bang for your buck, for your time.
It looks like that's all the questions that are currently in the chat, but if anybody else wanted to unmute themselves and ask a question, you're welcome to.
I'll chime in here on your behalf, Linda. So we have our MWA River cleanup coming up here in a couple of months. And just in my few years with the MWA here, I've noticed that lesser celandine is becoming a pretty significant problem for us. You know, whereas we had a nice clear floodplain to pick up stuff from a few years ago, we are now inundated with an undergrowth that we can't find anything through. Where do you rank this threat in terms of invasives? Is it too far gone for us to bring under control?
Probably so. I mean, I don't know, you know, certainly every nook and cranny of the Musconetcong watershed, but generally, it's not feasible to stop it, or even slow it for the most part. It's become so amazingly widespread. Every time, you know, there's those little tubers, if you haven't seen them, that when, you know, storm events from upstream will wash down a bazillion tubers and establish further downstream. So there's no particularly good way to get rid of them. It's unfortunate but true. I mean, the only thing that saves it, so to speak, and it can be very damaging to wildflowers, floodplain wildflowers, but they are short. They do not stop any woody plants from establishing. So, in the scheme of things, the amount of effort you'd have to try to fail to control it probably wouldn't be worth the effort. And it might just be an unfortunate thing we have to deal with, that we don't get some of those floodplain ephemeral natives. But there just isn't much you could do about it. I mean, you can spray it. You could try to spray it early in the year because it can come up in, late February, March for sure, when nothing else really is up, and you could spray it. But, you have to question whether, I'm not shy about using herbicides when I think it will work, but I'm not particularly fond of using herbicides when I don't think it'll work. And I think lesser celandine is a case where, unless you truly are finding the first bits of something in your watershed, the odds of you gaining control over it are very low. And the likelihood is that it'll get worse over time. And there's just not a lot you can do about it, unfortunately. That's just my opinion from some experience trying to control it. But it's just, it's not a great situation. Unfortunately, there's not much we can do about it.
I do see someone with their hand raised. Colette, if you wanted to go ahead.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for this great presentation. Really, really informative. Just to circle back around to removing the invasive species and the time management, et cetera, is it wise to remove and plant something native at the same time?
If that works, if you have the budget and the time and the resources to do it, you do have to somehow address, right, that underlying problem of deer overabundance, right? So
Right.
you pull out a barberry, you plant a spice bush that's 3 foot tall. Well, if there's 100 deer per square mile, that spice bush doesn't have a chance. So the reason that barberry is there is because the deer killed the spice bush that was there naturally 25 years ago. So you have to somehow compensate, right, through fencing, mini exclosures, whatever the case may be. So you really got to think that through, as far as, if I throw something into this system, will it get past the deer? So that's a real fundamental question. A lot of times when we're doing early detection, rapid response, we don't care. I mean, I'm exaggerating a little bit, but not that much. If I kill 15 Siebold's viburnums and the result is 20 barberries grow in its place, I'm still way better off than I was, because the Siebold's viburnum are actually a bigger long-term threat than the barberry, and preventing their spread is much more significant than a little bit more spread of barberry. So we don't necessarily prioritize restoration, and what we do, we're really trying to slow the spread of emerging invasive species that will do untold damage at that spot and elsewhere. But yeah, I mean, it is hard to, it is hard when you're doing removal of invasives and no native will come in because there's too many deer. That doesn't make you feel overly happy. So.
Well, we have I live in Madison, up by Morristown,
Okay.
and I'm part of the MEC, and we're trying to restore just a small, I don't know, maybe it's probably only 5 acres, just a small piece of land in town, and there is deer fencing. Some trees have fallen, so we're repairing and getting the town involved, et cetera. So there are one or two deer in there left. We're trying to figure out how to get rid of them. But we do have fencing, and we're just talking about in the spring, like should we, whatever, like I said, should we pull and then plant something at the same time, plant non-invasive or plant native at the same time, et cetera. But
I mean, if you have a fence, then yeah, you can, even if there are a couple deer in it, you know, you probably can be successful. Um, you know, I think, you know, that fences, as you obviously know, they're a bit of a curse as well. It takes a lot of maintenance for them, especially if
Right.
they're in a forest.
Right.
You know, there are individual cages and things like that that you can do if you don't have a fence.
Right.
You know, a lot of times if you're doing like a stream restoration or something like that, you might consider buying, you know, 1 7-gallon pot tree that you could just put a buckrock guard on because it's already 6 feet tall, as opposed to buying, you know, 10 1-gallon plants for the same total price. That the 1-gallon plants are short and they're just going to get wiped out by deer. You know, so there's kind of cost benefit things there. You know, is it better to buy fewer larger plants that are above the browse line versus more smaller plants? So those are a lot of decisions you have to make if you don't have an exclusion fence around the whole area. A lot of times what we do and we recommend doing, and I do at my own house, you know, basically mini exclosures. So we know that deer can jump 8+ feet, right? The only time they do that is when the other side of the fence has a clear landing area. You know, so if you buy, what I've done many times is buy a 50-foot roll of fence, connected at both ends in whatever shape you want, wherever you're at. A 5-foot fence with a 50-foot perimeter, deer will not jump into it because the inside landing area is too small, that they don't feel comfortable doing it. Plus, if they do get in, they don't feel like they have enough running start to get out. So you can create a series of these mini exclosures, you know, for in any situation, a stream side restoration, whatever you want, and buy smaller plants, put them in those, let them get to 5, 6, 7 feet tall, take that same material, move it to another spot and reuse it and plant more plants. So if you don't have a big, you know, exclosure on, you know, a whole area, you could try to do these methods where you buy bigger plants instead of smaller plants, or have mini exclosures, you know, to get some native plant cover going.
Great. It's a great idea. Thank you very much. Thank
Okay.
you.
And to be honest, like when you said 5 acres, I'm telling you, that's where the action's at. You know, getting volunteers, no matter how big the property is, to really adopt and do good stewardship. The scale isn't nearly as important. If you end up growing and there's more and more people, then find another 5-acre spot. You know, we have to stop thinking that unless you solve some huge problem over 10,000 acres, it's not worth the time. Oh, heck yes, it is. The thing with nature, you know, like in Doug Tallamy, if people heard about Doug Tallamy bringing nature home, every little bit helps. And you know, that's just the way nature works. If you have even small patches of plants for bugs to eat and birds to eat fruit and, you know, et cetera, that's better than not. So 5 acres, great. That's a scale that you could actually feel like you're doing something. And you could see it. You know, it doesn't have to be 100 or 1,000 or 10,000 acres to be good stewardship.
Thank you again. Really good points. Thank you.
We have a few more minutes for questions. Let's see. Are there any animal or insect invasives that are up and comers that we should be watching out for?
Yes. I don't know if folks are noticing it yet or not, if you're looking at your beech trees. So as we've essentially lost all of our ash trees, so will go the beech, unfortunately. Beech leaf disease started several to 5 years ago were the first observations in New Jersey. It has spread like wildfire across the state. And unfortunately, it does look like the demise of our beech trees. So we're getting these massive insults to our system, losing all the ash, now losing all the beach. But yeah, those are the ones, when you think about, what an invasive plant does, horrible damage. It's the invasive pests and pathogens that could really do damage, though. There's no invasive plant that's going to have the impacts that emerald ash borer or beech leaf disease or have had and will have. So unfortunately, there are always pests and pathogens on the horizon, and we really got to get a lot smarter about how we do international trade. We have the technology, we have the ways to prevent, certainly emerald ash borer, and we just got to do them. But yeah, so yes, there are. The pests and pathogens tend to be the things that do the most damage. And once they're here, there's essentially nothing you can do to stop them. So those are the worst of the worst. They're so much worse than the plants, invasive plants.
On that, is there any research being done on the healthy beech trees that you know of?
No, I don't. Gene Epiphan at Rutgers Cooperative is probably the person that I've run into that knows the most about this in New Jersey. Rutgers Cooperative, I haven't checked their website recently, but they had some really good stuff on beech leaf disease. I guess maybe it was in the fall or last summer. The last I looked, it was really good. Probably the best you're going to see. So if anything's going on, there's hopes like for ash, for example, that's much further along. There's hopes that, we'll find resistant individuals, and maybe there's some evidence, maybe there isn't. Remember this started in Michigan 10 plus 15 years before it hit New Jersey. So the hope is that there will be some resistant individuals that will carry the species on, and maybe that'll happen, maybe it won't. But I personally have not seen one yet in New Jersey. If people are making observations, and I'm not saying like kind of barely alive, but I mean looking real good, let me know, because Ben Paisano with the State Forest Service was following up on observations last summer of ash that looked, halfway decent. But yeah, don't waste Ben's time if it's like, oh, it's alive, but it looks horrible. No, I mean like full on canopy looks great. Otherwise we shouldn't waste Ben's time. But if there are ones like that and you see them, let me know, or contact Ben Paisano directly at the Forest Service. So we'll keep our fingers crossed, but clearly lots of damage has been done. So we'll hope that there are resistant individuals will pop up, but yeah, we'll find out. Ben will be talking at our conference in April, so I'm hoping he'll give an update on ash, potential ash resistance, even from Michigan populations, et cetera.
Thanks, Mike. Yeah, we just did our the invasives countdown, and we had the chestnut blight on there, and that one went viral. And it's going to be sad to see the ashes and the beech sort of go the same way.
Yeah, and a lot of times the beech are growing on soils that were not post-agricultural, so they're the better soils, but invasives will get into those places. If you have massive die-off of the canopy, all bets are up, no matter what the past land use was. But we'll see what happens. But it's another sort of massive insult to our forests. The loss of beech will be.
Thanks, everyone. We'll leave a few more minutes for questions. We've got until 8:30 we can be on. We'll stay here if you have any more questions. If you are leaving in that time, I just want to say thank you again so much for joining us. I'll put in one final plug. We do have a native plant sale in May. So if you're looking to get some native plants, either for your yard or to replace areas where you're pulling invasives, check us out in May, usually around Mother's Day. And I also do want to say thank you again so much, Mike, for your talk. It's really informative. I can't wait to follow up. Hopefully, maybe do some invasive species strike teaming near us in the Musconetcong. That would be amazing.
Yeah, let us know. We're always around. I mean, part of what we do is we try to help folks. So emails, phone calls, from anyone, we're always willing to try to help. And yes, buy native plants. It's the way to go.
Thank you so much, everybody.